Good, thank you. Lovely to be here from a cold, wet Rome. And I'm as ever delighted to be able to talk about a person who deeply fascinates me and holds my attention. So I think to begin with, they ought to be on our part. I'm thinking from the point of view of Christian theologians especially, but also Muslim theologians, they ought to be an ongoing contemporary attempt to examine Al-Husayn from fresh angles all the time, searching, if you like, for what I call a new or fresh hermeneutical keys. In other words, keys that will interpret his life for us, keys that will unlock some of the mysteries of his life, greater depths of his theology, of his spirituality, of the things that drove him to take his stand at Karbala, but also unlock the greater depths of his own humanity and his own human life. I'm talking about what I have started to call an Husaynian praxis. I mean an attempt to present Al-Husayn's life in a manner that makes it possible for people to actually emulate him, that puts him within the reach of ordinary men and women, no matter what their religious convictions, but men and women who are not necessarily engaged in massive, worldwide, international, or even local struggles for justice, because most of us actually aren't. Our engagement for justice is often at a far more personal level of our own private daily life. Our engagement for justice, for most of us, is given over to far more mundane human things. There are people every day who suffer authentic martyrdom just trying to do the right thing, trying to live morally and ethically in a world that has become very difficult in which to live ethically. People who in public and private, without any reward, in fact, often resulting in an increase in difficulty, choose to live the ideals that I would call the ideals of Karbala and Al-Husayn. And so I'm thinking specifically of ordinary people like myself whose struggles for justice are private, daily Karbala moments and battles, rather than, and whether it be in our marriages, in our relationships, our friendships, the schoolroom, the workplace, these daily battles we have to fight to be ethical, even when nobody is watching. So there's obviously a huge groundswell of devotion to Al-Husayn in the Shia Islamic world, and a theology and a spirituality constructed around his life that is specific to the Shia worldview. But it's crucial for me that such an example of humanity, of integrity, of non-accommodation with immorality and injustice, that such a man should be introduced to a much wider world than just the Shia Islamic world, a much wider contemporary audience. There's untold devotion, of course, to Hussein in the world of faith in Shia Islam, but I would suggest that perhaps a new key to understanding Al-Husayn's life on a far wider level is to understand his life and his sacrifice not from a religious angle or even a political angle, but purely from a human angle. Not one that is restricted to one particular faith family or one particular worldview or even one particular nation, but an interpretive key that is a key that unlocks the mystery of his life, that is primarily a human key that understands his imama, understands his isma, understands the integrity of his life. There are, of course, you know better than I, in Al-Husayn's life as we know it, some gaps in the biography, elements especially in his early life about which we don't have a huge amount of information. Biographical gaps can often be quite dangerous because they lead to myth. They lead to people padding the gaps with stories of or pious accounts of things that may have been said or done. Now, myth in itself is never a bad thing, because every myth is constructed around an element of truth. The meanings or the interpretations of myths tend to be modified from generation as we each of us reinterpret our past. But the danger with myth, as I've said before, is it can easily become the place where we build our golden calves. And that's a very bad thing, where we begin to create a theology or a spirituality around someone that is so great, it transcends all boundaries. and makes that person unreachable, make that person impossible to be imitated in any real way. Of course, in some cases, this is just the result of bad scholarship, but bad scholarship should never be met with condemnation. It should be met with better scholarship, always. For me, the key point about Al-Husayn is that he's not inaccessible at all. He's not one who can't be imitated by ordinary, everyday people, nor is he only accessible to one particular religious family or to religious people in general. He's quite clearly, for me, and this should be obvious to anyone who reads his life, a man who lives his life with such a profound level of integrity and of courage and of valor, one of those startling personalities who forces us to turn around and face ourselves, face the way we live, see the difference between who we think we are and who we really are. One of those people who forces me to ask whether my own life, whatever courage, whatever valor, whatever integrity is present, whether my own life actually adds any quality at all to the life of those around me and the world in which I live. Personalities like Husayn, they're the very best in history, and they arise in every generation, in every religious and non-religious family. They're people who know what it means to be defeated, what it means to suffer horrendously, what it means to endure struggle, what it means to lose loved ones. But they find their way out of these things into a final victory. And people like that, I never tire of saying, they don't just happen. People like that are raised up in every generation by God, so that what is crucial for me to understanding Husayn is that we try to present him sometimes to the wider world as less of a religious figure confined to one particular expression of faith, and see him as a model given to humanity, all of humanity, no matter what their religious or non-religious beliefs. And I give you this example because I think that of all the virtues, the human virtues that dominate the life of Husayn, I think the virtue that is most important and the virtue that infuses all of his speech, all of his actions, all of his choices is the virtue of integrity. Because integrity is not a religious virtue. Integrity is a human virtue. If you want inner peace, not world peace, but inner peace, you have to live with integrity. People who experience genuine inner peace don't have it because their lives are free of difficulty and problems, but because they live lives of integrity. People who live with integrity don't lie awake at night, worrying about what they've forgotten to do or how to cover their tracks, thinking up excuses for all the things they failed in, wondering how they can hide their mistakes. If people want inner peace, the sort of peace that we see in the face and the heart of Al-Husayn on the day of Karbala, a genuine inner conviction of peace, you have to live with integrity. And if you want wisdom, true wisdom, you have to live with integrity, because wise people are always people of integrity. It's an integrity that is unyielding, that refuses to compromise even for the sake of human convenience. Wise people, people of integrity like Al-Husayn, live as people of their word. They do what they say they're going to do. Every promise they make can be trusted. They are people who don't just have principles, but who actually live daily by those principles. Because when a person lives with integrity, when I am in public, exactly the same as I am in private, when I do the same things in public in front of witnesses that I do when there are no witnesses, when people live with that sort of integrity, all the other virtues begin to flow into place. Justice, truthfulness, fairness, honesty, those virtues automatically slot into place when integrity becomes the foundation of my life. And I suggest to you that in the life of Al-Husayn, the human Al-Husayn, the model for humanity, integrity is his greatest witness, his greatest value for humanity. So I would propose, as a Christian theologian, and I know of many Christian saints who have lived with integrity, I still would propose that Al-Husayn is primarily, for humanity, a superb example of integrity. Because there's always going to be stuff in our lives, in our daily work, in our marriages, in our families, in our relationships. There's always going to be stuff that is okay to do and other stuff that is emphatically never, ever okay to do. And Al-Husayn understood that. And the instant that Al-Husayn understood that, his life began moving towards its end. To live prophetically as he did doesn't mean predicting the future. It means being scrupulously faithful to the present moment and the truth of the present moment. Al-Husayn understood that, and the moment he understood that, his life began to grow towards its end, and the number of his enemies began to increase. For you and I, who are not Al-Husayn, and who are not called, if you like, to fight on some world stage, who don't live our lives so publicly, perhaps, for you and I, integrity sometimes just means the guts to hold on, to hold on to a promise that could so easily break, but we decide not to break it, or to hold on to some truth that we could so easily compromise, but we decide, I'm not going to compromise this. To hold on to a commandment of God, which we could bend slightly, but we just won't bend it. I think Al-Husayn speaks loudly now in our own days. He speaks loudly into the lives of people who are indecisive, the vacillating people, ordinary people like you and like me, but who are faced daily with ethical decisions that they have to choose to make, even tiny moral decisions in their marriages or in their families or in their work ethic, decisions that are so tiny but that absolutely paralyze them, because moral decisions always cost us. There's always a price to pay. Little stands for justice, little stands for morality are daunting enough quite often to make us go against what we know to be true, because we're so terrified of going the other way. Just struggling each day with the truth that demands to be told is for most of us a massive Karbala moment. It was for Al-Husayn. And for Al-Husayn, it wasn't just about truths, political truths, or social truths, or individual or particular truths. No, Al-Husayn was primarily interested in the truth. Individual truths are not what most people want. What most people are looking for is not truths about this or truths about that. There are plenty of religious truths and political truths and social truths. There are no shortage of truths. No, the truth that interests most people is the truth about who we are, the truth about who God is, the truth about how life here on earth should be lived, the truth about death and what death actually means, the truth about what precisely comes after death. That's the truth that Al-Husayn stood for, the truth that most people are looking for. And he stands before us, for me, as a model of profound inner peace and wisdom because of his integrity. He invites us to re-embrace and embrace the Karbala moments that arise every day. You know, as Shia faithful, those who are Shia faithful and Muslim faithful, you know better than I do that Karbala was never intended to be a once-off event in history, a single incident that happened on a particular day to be forgotten forever. No, the truth about Karbala is that it is a recurring event. It is an event which occurs over and over again, and an event which people are invited to inhabit, to take a stance in, a space, if you like, which people are invited to live in and constantly renew. The Karbala event, as it happened in one moment of history, sketches out for humanity a particular space in which they're invited to live lives that are more prolific, more constructive, lives that add more quality, lives that won't compromise the things that are important, lives that have meaning. If you like, and I've said this often enough as well, God creates this space in humanity called Karbala, in which he invites us to live. He writes it on people's hearts. Karbala becomes the pen by which he inscribes into our consciousness the capacity for justice, the capacity for courage. If you examine the world, your own world, my own world, or just your own life through the prism of Karbala, it becomes possible for us to step back for a moment and assess our lives, or maybe reassess them, even in the worst moments, even in moments of immense loss and pain, to assess our lives and to understand that they are not futile, that they are not wasted, that they are not aimless or without goals, but that because of Karbala and the model of Hussein, our lives could easily become something more potentially fruitful. What seemed to be for Al-Husayn on the day of Karbala a resounding military defeat contained within itself the glimpses already of some final victory, so that through the prism of Karbala, we see that the daily defeats we suffer when we make mistakes in the choices we make, they still show forth glimpses of some final victory. If we just treat Karbala like some other battle, like the Battle of Britain, or the Battle of Waterloo, no different from any other battle we learn when we were at school or we learn in the university, we would be ignoring the way that it has managed to stitch itself into the fabric of so much of humanity, so many people's lives and prayers and devotion. We would discount the quality that it keeps adding to the lives of people of faith. The fact that Karbala has been present within 1,300 years or more of study and of prayer and of scholarship, and has constantly inspired ever greater depths. For me, Karbala and Al-Husayn's life, they are the place where injustice begins to unravel, where iniquity begins to fall apart. Why? Well, because Al-Husayn beckons me as a Christian to live my life more intensely, more intense in my daily conversation with God, no matter what the shape of that conversation, more intense in the gratitude I express to him and the gratitude I show for life, more intense in the way I engage with issues of justice and morality and right. Gratitude's a very interesting virtue, because gratitude is the antidote to ego, really. Gratitude is the great antidote to selfishness and self-centeredness. Gratitude to God. Gratitude is the antidote to the misery I feel when I can't get my way, when I think I want my way, or when what I want is not given to me immediately. The antidote to that misery is gratitude. Gratitude is the antidote for all the unhappiness I feel because people around me have got things I wish I had. Gratitude is the antidote for all our unhappiness that comes into our lives because we can't have the things we have convinced ourselves we can't live without. Karbala and Hussein invite us to gratitude because his gratitude expressed itself in the willingness to give up his human life for something much greater. That's gratitude to God. So that Karbala for me as a Christian and Hussein become an orientation, a way of walking through life with such profound sadness before every single incident of injustice and cruelty and wickedness, even the smallest ones that don't even affect me. With such profound sadness when I stand before examples of wickedness, a sadness that should goad me and push me into a better way of living, into a more engaged way of living with the people around me. My life and yours should be a reproach to the tyrants of our day, because tyrants don't just exist in palaces and on thrones. Tyrants exist everywhere, in schoolrooms and playgrounds, in universities, in marriages, in families. They are tyrants, and our lives are meant to be a reproach, as Hussein's was a reproach against the Yazidi model of how life should be, against the model that was being lived in Kufa and Damascus. We're invited really by Karbala to do that. Because those tyrants are wherever you find them, big or small. Those tyrants are the one who force themselves or convince themselves that unless we use force and coercion, unless we use violence and wealth and weaponry, the world will never be better. No, that's not the Husseini model. That's the Yazidi model. The Husseini model is a completely different model of what makes life and the world a better place. So that Karbala and Hussein become a contradiction, a sign of contradiction to the lie that the world will only be better with wealth and with weapons and with coercion. So you see, in the end, Al-Husayn is not a particular figure belonging to one family. He's quite clearly a universal model of human virtues. not religious virtues, but virtues that are inbuilt into every human life, integrity and all the ones that follow that. So I think we need to keep reoffering Al-Husayn to new generations with fresh angles to look at of his life, whether those generations are Muslim or non-Muslim, whether they are religious or non-religious makes no difference. For many people, Al-Husayn might end up being the one who offers them light when all the lights they believed in suddenly start to flicker and to go out. For me, the key to unlocking his life can't just be a religious key, because that would negate the possibility of him being more than a religious model. People keep asking me as a priest, what is it about this man that makes you talk about him all the time and write about him when you should be writing about other things? What is it that you find so appealing and so attractive? After all, you and he are from completely different faith families. They have many aspects in common, of course, but they have some substantial differences. But the two things I've mentioned already are the two things that attract me: his integrity and his gratitude for his life and for truth. The virtues that Al-Husayn shows me are human virtues that are proper to all human beings, whether they are religious or not, to live with integrity and to live with gratitude. Now, I know this has ended up sounding like a bit of a sermon, a bit of a Friday khutbah about Al-Husayn, but I suppose we could do far worse than listen to a sermon about Al-Husayn, because I think that integrity and gratitude are top of the list, because they are two of the things that are greatly lacking in our contemporary world. People don't live with gratitude, and this is seen in their desperate need to accumulate, but they don't live with integrity because numerous people, including myself, are not always the same publicly as they are privately. We are not always practices of our preaching. And where do you learn these virtues? Where do people learn integrity and gratitude? Where do we learn to live them? Not in the mosque, not in the church or the synagogue. Those are not places to learn virtues. As somebody famously said years ago in a Hollywood film, if you ask God for patience, for sabr, he's not going to give you patience like some magic gift. He's just going to give you opportunities to practice patience, because the patience is already there. If I ask God to give me kindness, he's not going to make me kind by some magical act. He's going to give me daily opportunities to practice being kind to others. Practices or opportunities to practice the virtues. We learn the virtues as Husayn did, not just in a masjid or a church, but in the daily round of life. It's when I stand among my friends and I hear them joking about other people because of their religion or their culture or their color, and when I interrupt that flow, that's where I learn integrity. It's already in my soul, but I just need to practice it. When I'm stuck in some dreadful queue on a rush day and I'm impatient because I have other things to do, that's where I learn patience, not prostrating in a mosque or kneeling in a church, but there in the post office where I want to explode at everybody. That's where I learn patience. I mean, surely Al-Husayn learned some of the best lessons of his life standing on the field of Karbala, surrounded by his sister, his nephews, his family. That's where he learned the real meaning of what it means to serve God, not just by prayer and by reading sacred texts, but in an active life. So when I get the wrong change given to me in the supermarket and I don't give it back, that's where people learn honesty, truly, in the round of life. So as a Christian theologian and a convinced Christian theologian, I am absolutely certain that for all of us, Christian, Muslim, non-religious, it doesn't matter, for all of us, Al-Husayn needs constantly to be reinterpreted with fresh angles, and that the more we stress some of these very human virtues in his life, like integrity and like gratitude that led to other things such as justice, the more we are able to present him as a model for humanity.